Story 1. I was definitely that one alternative girl in high school who thought she was cooler than everyone else because she was into bands and movies that weren't even that obscure, laughing my head off. Story 2. I was the bully in my elementary school, and I feel as if I shouldn't even try to get over how much of an absolute waste of space I feel like because the kids I bullied deserve for me to feel this way. Story 3. The way I used to treat my mom on Christmas morning makes me reflect deeply. I was a very particular and confusing child and teenager. Not wealthy or spoiled, but I had strong preferences. I can't imagine how she felt when I opened presents she spent her hard-earned money on, trying her best to determine whether I would like them, and then I'd say, "I'm not going to use this," or "I wouldn't wear this." It genuinely breaks my heart to imagine how she must have felt like a failure when it was I who was unappreciative and had no filter. God knows she had so much else on her plate, and her own child had no clue they were hurting her when she was trying her best to make them happy. Story 4. Compulsive lying. I was convinced that no one would like me as I was, so I made up a fake me. You know something people universally do not like? Liars. It took becoming an adult to realize that it is better to be uncool than to be a liar. Story 5. Telling my girlfriend in junior high to smile more. It makes me cringe just typing it out. If I could, I would go back and slap 14-year-old me in the face and apologize to all of the girls I dated in high school. I was a bad boyfriend, honestly. I'm glad I grew up. Unfortunately, I'm nearing 50, and one thing I wasn't ready for is the near constant, random reminders of ways I messed up as a young person and really wishing I'd lived my life differently in some ways. Oh well, at least I can be a better person now, and I'm pretty proud of who I've become. Story 6. I was rude to a guy at a bar once, just showing off and being a jerk, and his face fell and he looked so beaten. Even after all these years, I wish I could apologize. Story 7. Not spending enough time around my parents. I especially remember how my mom loved going downtown and exploring, and she wanted me with her when I was a teenager. Now she is nearly fully crippled and cannot do this anymore, and I have lost the majority of my chances to just be with her. If any young ones read this, then remember this. When your parents want to spend time with you, then take it because time goes by very fast, and you lose precious moments to make memories with the people who will always mean the most to you. Story 8. When I was in middle school, I had a massive crush on my best friend, but he was dating someone. So I befriended her while secretly hating her, as I didn't like her even before they started dating, to endear myself to him even more. I knew that I didn't really want to be her friend, but I thought it would make me look better to him, and it did. I was flirting with him the whole time while pretending I was rooting for them and both of their best friends. Eventually, when they broke up, he asked me out, and I got instant karma when my parents told me I wasn't allowed to date. I fully deserved that, and I still think about how messed up that was. It's not an excuse by any means, but I thought that kind of behavior was okay because I saw that same level of manipulation at home all the time. I realize now how wrong it is and have become much more self-aware. Story 9. I am ashamed of how I used to treat women. I manipulated and used them to satisfy my sexual desires and boost my ego. Then I would discard them and act like they did not exist. I was so cruel and hurtful to them emotionally. Every time I think of how I acted, I feel so bad for how they must have felt. I have learned a lot since then and am just trying to be better and treat the next woman I am in a relationship with the best I can. Story 10. Fighting, drugs, prostitution, and lying. Was not a good young person, but I turned most of it around. Really loved marijuana though. Picked it back up at 40, no regrets. Story 11. Cheating on someone instead of breaking up with them, because I was taught since my childhood it's the right thing to do, is a pattern I've seen repeated by almost everyone in my extended family or their friends. Even those who weren't cheating were full of understanding and excuses for those who did. Bonus points for phrases like, "What he doesn't know can't hurt him," or "That's how you save your marriage or relationship," and so on. Story 12. I used to be very promiscuous, not just a little bit, but extremely so, like Bonnie Blue. I would sometimes sleep with 5 guys a day. I don't know why, but my dad allowed it and even let the guys have encounters with me in the house. Looking back, I feel so grossed out by my behavior. Story 13. I grew up in the era of boys will be boys. I grabbed a lot of breasts as a young child, knowing very well I liked touching them and could get away with it. Luckily, I grew out of it, but I was a little creep until I was about 7. Story 14. Sexting friends' crushes because they were friends' crushes and going to school the next day knowing I had seen nudes of girls my friends wanted to date. In hindsight, I wasn't an amazing friend. Story 15. My attitude and how I acted towards others in high school. I was difficult and had challenges in relationships with major anger issues. When I turned 18, I found out I had a hormonal disorder, which makes sense now. Story 16. My lack of emotional regulation and self-awareness was due to trauma and a negative environment while growing up. I didn't know that my normal environment at home wasn't normal in the real world. Story 17. All the times I was rightfully mad about something and turned into a raving lunatic because I couldn't control myself. I finally learned that flying off the handle that way makes you lose validity even when you're right. Story 18. I was a full-blown heroin addict by 16. I did some pretty terrible things back then. I'll never forgive myself for how I treated my mother or for getting expelled by grade 10. On the plus side, I got that phase out of my system early, and I've been sober for almost 12 years. Story 19. I was mean to a girl in our friend group in high school. I didn't like her much, and I excluded her from our pre-ball prom party. I feel terrible about it now. Story 20. This isn't my shame, but it shames me just the same. Our family went to my dad's old medical school friend's funeral. His widow arrived, and she was gorgeous. Super curvy, wide hips, tiny waist, ample chest. My 2 teenage brothers immediately started smirking. Then one whispered to the other, "Red beans and rice didn't miss her." Everybody heard. The funeral literally came to a standstill for a moment. 6-hour drive home, and my dad was furious the whole way. Story 21. Not knowing how to cope with borderline personality disorder after my diagnosis and spiraling downward into addiction, toxic behaviors, and self-destruction. Still working on bettering myself and have come a long way. Sober from a lot of things now. Story 22. Losing my virginity and the way it happened and where and who. Please don't let anyone ever pressure you into something you never wanted for yourself. I've lived this too many times, and I am very naive, but I hope others can be better than me and be smarter. Story 23. Being actively mean to my immediate family. It's mostly my fault, of course, but I also wish I was raised a bit differently. My parents didn't really try to instill in me an understanding of why I can't treat people that way, I feel like. Story 24. I talked my boyfriend into going down on me when I was in college because I went down on him, also my idea. He didn't want to, but he ended up doing it, and shortly after, when he broke up with me, he was very upset that I convinced him to do it. While I didn't necessarily force him to do anything, I didn't respect him, and I feel really weird about the whole thing even 15 years later. Feels like sexual assault to me. Story 25. My anger issues. Finally really dealing with them in my 40s, but I spent years alienating people I liked and breaking things I had to either repair or replace. Story 26. As a teenager, lying to make myself look better and stealing things from stores I didn't need. I swore off both many years ago. Still feel guilty for being such a jerk. Story 27. Lacking confidence and having been dated for a joke at school and largely unlucky with girls. In my teens and early 20s, I didn't respect women as much as I should have, was very selfish, narcissistic, and often objectified them. Story 28. I greatly dislike my younger self, and my past self would greatly dislike my present self. I was a judgmental little fool who grew up to face struggles I never would have predicted. Hindsight is perfect, and that was a hell of a year. Story 29. Thinking that I was some kind of boss for giving the people who bullied me these goofy comebacks that were so awful. Honest to God, I don't care how messed up it's left me. At that point, I deserved that with my horrendous goth makeup. Story 30. Stole my friend's boyfriend in sophomore year. It still makes me cringe. They broke up, we dated for a few months, and then we broke up. It's over 20 years later, and they reconnected a couple of years back and just bought a house. So now I get to ponder whether they would have stayed together from the beginning if it weren't for my behavior. I'm so glad I've grown from that fiery piece of garbage. Edit, sophomore year of high school. Story 31. I used to be a pick-me. I was super competitive with other girls and would only consume media that the guys liked. I think I disliked my narcissistic mom and didn't have a dad around, and I took it out on other women. After college, I had to take a serious look at myself and wonder why I had no female friends and had super toxic ex-boyfriends. I'll never forgive myself for some of the ways I acted towards a couple of former friends in particular, who felt like I was a fake friend and were pretty justified in that. But I think I've grown to be better, and cutting out my narcissistic mom and other toxic family members has helped me to recognize and deal with my own toxic patterns. I'd like to think I'm a better friend now, and after my last very abusive relationship, I think it'll be a long, long time, if ever, before I feel comfortable entering the dating world again. So, it's been nice to prioritize friendships for once. Story 32. Thinking about all of the anxious ways I spoke to my mom as a teenager mostly. Now that she's not around anymore, there are so many things I wish I could apologize for. I mean, technically I did while she was still with me, but I don't know if I've forgiven myself for it entirely. Story 33. We used to go to donut shops in the late 1990s and pull the trash bags of discarded donuts out of the dumpster. We would put them in my friend's car and drive around, throwing them at pedestrians. Story 34. All the risky situations I put myself in. Walking home by myself through the middle of the city at 3 a.m. after the club. Meeting up with random guys and bringing them home or going to their place. If I had a daughter, I would never allow her to do all of the things I did. Story 35. Using gay as a catch-all adjective for anything or anyone I didn't like or was otherwise disdainful of. I didn't know any openly gay people then and didn't have the empathy to see why it was hurtful. Story 36. Cyberbullying before it was a recognized thing. I used to trick people from school into downloading the Sub-7 Trojan and then connect to their computers and mess with them. I did at least delete it from their computers after I'd had my fun. There was this one girl at school who I used to send emails to pretending to be Gmail administrator asking for her password. She'd give it to me every time and I'd change her password so she would make a new account with the next sequential number. Did it 8 times before I got bored. I convinced one girl I didn't like that I was on the plane with her back from Vanuatu and the flight attendant gave me her email address because I thought she was so beautiful. I chatted with her for about 6 months as this guy, and she would tell me all sorts of things, including talking negatively about me and all of our friends. Yeah, not proud of all that. Story 37. Drugs and drinking have done permanent damage to a lot of relationships with people. I've been clean for a few years now, and my parents still walk on eggshells around me. Story 38. That I lost myself chasing illusions that were sold to me by family, priests, and privileged idiots. That I dared to hope and believe the world was better than it actually was instead of caring for myself. And that, when I was a child traumatized by the hellscape that is this earth, I already knew better, but lost myself when I got surrounded by all the opium the masses drink every day until I almost drowned in it. Story 39. How I treated my mother. She was a very difficult parent to have in a lot of ways, but I was too self-centered to give her the patience or compassion she deserved. She had a sad life. Story 40. I went through a period of drinking heavily in my 20s. I'm ashamed of how I acted when I was drunk. It really keeps me from ever drinking again. Story 41. My best friend had a huge crush on a guy who actually liked me. He hit on me and I did not object, so to speak. We were still friends after, but that was a terrible thing to do, and I feel terrible about it now. Story 42. When I was a teenager, I hung out with some friends, and we would shoplift items from stores. Petty stuff, really. Cassette tapes, a tool, whatever. I got caught once and never did it again, but I hate that I was down that path. Story 43. I ghosted more than a few girls. I had it in my head that it would be less cruel and hurtful than just breaking up with them. Then I got ghosted myself. Oh, that's what that feels like. Add the karma of having a reputation as a playboy. I had to do a lot of work on myself and make some apologies to become the kind of guy who deserves the amazing relationship I'm in. Story 44. 2 weeks into my first serious relationship, I kissed someone else. I thought I could just do it and break up with my boyfriend right after. He found out anyway and was heartbroken. It is still the worst emotional pain I've ever felt. I was 16 at the time and am 24 now. I fell into a horrible depression for a few months and felt like someone had died. I'm lucky to still have him as a friend to this day. Somehow he forgave me for something I haven't forgiven myself for. Story 45. I stalked my ex-boyfriend for 3 years. I'm mortified now looking back. But at the time I was a lovesick, heartbroken teenager, and I couldn't get over him. However, if he hadn't dumped me, I never would have met my husband, so he actually did me a favor. Story 46. I had become a hothead, generally miserable in university. Classmates and those who lived in the same dorm as I did felt like they had to be careful about what they said to me. I ended up leaving just shortly before the end of my second year due to having pneumonia. There was an international student with whom I never got along, over petty, dumb girl drama, and I decided to give her a farewell message through Instagram. I basically told her where to go, and the last part of the message I typed, "Go back where you came from, Muslim." Sadly, I sent it and quickly blocked her before she had the chance to respond. I was 19 at the time and now 27, and still feel horrible about what I said to her. I never said racist comments to anyone before, and it's something I deeply regret. Sometimes I think about sending her an apology in some way, but I wonder if it's too late now to do so.